Welcome to Jewish History Soundbites podcast with Yehuda Geberer. Immerse yourself in the rich tapestry of Jewish history as we explore fascinating tales and uncover hidden gems from our glorious past. Brought to you by our proud sponsor, Cross River, a leader at the intersection of financial services and technology, committed to empowering the communities they serve. Cross River's steadfast support fuels our mission to preserve our heritage and foster a vibrant future for all. Contact Cross River through their website at crossriver.com.
A date which will live in infamy.
Both
of those projects, initiatives, got off the ground because of the Galilee.
The 11 Olympic team members slain in West Germany. The Olympic Games.
Zugerecht Brüder in Amerika.
Out of the 24 who were killed were Americans who had come to learn in Hebron.
I say 1 million Jewish children who were made to be cut loose.
Whoever heard such beautiful words?
It is never too little, it is never too late, and it is never enough.
Jewish History Soundbites, bringing alive the world of our glorious past. Here is our host, live from Jerusalem, Jewish historian
Jewish History Soundbites, and this episode is about the earthquake that shook up the upper Galilee and southern Lebanon in 1837, January 1st, 1837, and it destroyed the city of Tzfas, and with it pretty much the entire Jewish community of Tzfas. And I felt that this story is relevant now, that Tzfas is a famous summer destination for so many tourists and so many locals. And now, unfortunately, it's out of reach, despite it being August, and it's generally its busiest season of the year. And it's unlike in 1837 when it was a natural disaster which caused it to be destroyed. Now it's the threat of an enemy, a human created disaster, and we pray for the safety for everyone, not only in Tzfas, but for everyone in Israel. So in honor of Tzfas being out of reach now, we want to talk about Tzfas, and I guess we could talk about a lot of things in Tzfas, but me being me, we'll talk about the destruction of Tzfas in 1837. It was a natural disaster, like I said, and often a few seconds of natural disaster can cause the greatest harm of all. I do tours in Tzfas normally, so I'm not able to bring tours there this summer. Luckily, there's been many tourists here anyway, and we'll be able to do tours in Yerushalayim. There's walking tours, and next time you're in Israel, I'm happy to take you around as well. You can ask me about the various tours, history tours that we do here. So 1837, this earthquake obviously wasn't in Tzfas only, it was in the general vicinity, but Tzfas was the hardest hit relatively. Tzfas Jewish community in the first half of the 19th century had three large and successful Jewish communities. There was the ancient Sephardic community, which was there for many, many centuries, and especially which had experienced a golden age in the 16th century, which is quite famous, the time of the mystics and Kabbalists of Tzfas, or Tzfat, as the Sephardim would have said it. And then more recently, in the late 18th century, was the Aliyas HaChasidim, or Aliyas Talmidei Baal Shem Tov, it was sometimes known as, 1777. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Vitebsk and Rav Ram Kalisker, they settled in Tveria, but Hasidim also settled in Tzfas. And then even more recently, in the early 1800s, was the community of the Prushim, the students of the Vilna Gaon, the Aliyah of the Talmidei Hagra, the students of the Vilna Gaon, between 1808 and 1815 or so. They settled also primarily in Tzfas, also a little bit in Tveria. There was, during this time, a ban on Ashkenazi settlement in Yerushalayim. The Ottoman Turkish government did not allow Ashkenazim, or European Jews, as they referred to them, to settle in Yerushalayim as a result of a whole debt fiasco of the Aliyah of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid in the year 1700. But that would change as the 19th century rolled on, and Ashkenazim were allowed to settle eventually in Yerushalayim. But the communities had already been well established in Tzfas. The Tzfas community was essentially flourishing. I mean, there's three large and growing, demographically growing, both natural growth and immigration to the Tzfas Jewish community in the early 1800s. Three communities, the Prushim, which is the Talmidei Hagra, we said, the students of the Vilna Gaon, which we would call Litvaks or Misnagdim or non-Hasidim. There's probably many ways you can use your most PC favorite term to define them. They called themselves the Prushim. Then there's the Hasidim we mentioned, and the Sephardic Jews, obviously Arabs as well. In fact, as far as I recall correctly, the majority of Tzfas was Arab at this point, but we're going to focus on the Jewish community. So they were a relatively poor Jewish community. This is way past the golden age of the Ottoman Empire. The economy wasn't great. In fact, there was a collapsed economic circumstance, a pretty tough financial situation. There was all kinds of political changes as well. In fact, it wasn't exactly the Ottoman Empire in charge during the year of the earthquake in 1837. Several years before that, there was a revolt against the Ottoman Empire by the Egyptian Muslim leader Muhammad Ali, and it went all the way up through the land of Israel and through Syria, Lebanon. He had reconquered it from the Ottoman Empire. It was now his son, Ibrahim Pasha, who was the Egyptian Muslim leader of this whole area. So it was not even under Ottoman control. In fact, it was the Ottomans retook it a couple of years later. 1840, the Ottomans retook control of the area. They defeated this Egyptian ruler, Ibrahim Pasha. So it wasn't under direct Ottoman control anyways during the 1837 earthquake, but in any event, the economy wasn't well. The Ashkenazim lived off of the Chalukah. They didn't come to make a living anyway. They came to live a life of spirituality, being supported by the Chalukah system, which was allocated funds from their communities of origin in Eastern Europe, both the Prushim and the Hasidim. But even those, such as the Sephardic Jews, who subsisted on their own income, it was not very successful, and they were a struggling community. But on the other hand, they were growing. It was a successful demographically. It was not in the greatest place financially. Also, there were other factors which made it a challenge for the Tzfas community at this time. There had been earlier earthquakes, earlier natural disasters. There was almost a century earlier, the 1759 earthquake, which caused much damage to the Tzfas community. And in fact, we would still be talking about that earthquake if not for the fact of the 1837 earthquake had so overshadowed it because it was so much more devastating, the one in 1837. But the one in 1759 also destroyed much of the community. There was also troubles with the general population. In fact, in 1834, just 3 years before the earthquake, there was a massacre of Tzfas Jews by Druze. Today, we get along with the Druze very well. They're very, very, very good friends of ours here in Israel. They're heroes in the Israeli army and all that. But in the 19th century, it wasn't so simple with the Druze. So in 1834, there was actually a pogrom carried out by the Druze against the Tzfas Jewish community. There was other calamities and challenges, like I said, political changes. But this is all leading up to the earthquake itself. So the earthquake itself takes place on January 1st, New Year's, on the regular calendar, which no one kept the Gregorian calendar in Tzfas because it was a Muslim area. They didn't use the Christian calendar. The Jews marked it by its Jewish date, 24 Teves, the 24th day of Teves, which happens to be the Alter Rebbe of Chabad's Yartzeit, the Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the Baal Tanya. That's just by coincidence. But it was the 24th day of Teves when, and in Hebrew, in all the records of the Tzfas Jewish community, they refer to it as the Ra'ash, the great Ra'ash, the great earthquake, the great noise, they called it. And it happened towards evening. It was already dark outside. Think about it. January is smack in the middle of the winter. The days are very short. The sun sets quite early over the Galilee. And it was bad weather. It was rainy. It was winter weather. Tzfas is relatively, obviously relatively for the Middle East, for Israel, but it's relatively cold. It's further north. It's higher up on a mountain, so it's compared to the rest of the country, it is relatively colder. There was a lot of rain, a lot of cold weather, a lot of mud landslides as a result of the earthquake. So the weather played a very crucial role in making there more damaging, more death, and the fact that it was towards evening. In other words, in those days, especially in a relatively primitive community such as Tzfas, where there was no modern technology, whatever there was in the 19th century wasn't yet there in Tzfas. So nighttime fell, and it was it. That was dark, and it was just at the beginning of the evening that this earthquake hits, and it's just a few seconds. There's no Richter scale in 1837, so we don't know for sure how high it was on what would have been the Richter scale, but the estimates is that it would be pretty high, above 7, and it was just a few seconds. The whole city shook, and a few seconds is all it took to destroy the entire city. The building style and the building materials, it was these old stone buildings, which were not built very well, which had been old, some of them centuries old buildings with no safety measures, obviously, no regulations. Not only that, but it's built on the mountainside, and these buildings are kind of built on top of one another in a mountainside style, like the foundations of one building are the foundations of the building is the foundation of the building on top of it, essentially of the street on top of it. So it has this ripple effect as soon as one building, which is closer to the bottom of the mountain, collapses because of the earthquake. So it really has an adverse effect on all the streets and buildings on top of it. And literally streets fell one on top of another. Roads broke apart, buildings have broke apart. So a combination of the earthquake itself, which was a very heavy earthquake, plus the building style and materials, plus the bad weather, plus the time of day that it happened, all that comes together that there's no light until the next morning. You can't do searches for people injured. You can't look around and find lost ones, loved ones. It's impossible. There's screams of the injured. People are from under rubble, from underneath buildings. It was a terrible, terrible thing. The next morning, they try looking through the rubble to find people, and it's rainy, bad weather. It's cold. They were still looking for people 7, 8, 9 days later. They were still trying to pull out people from underneath the rubble. It was really an awful situation. Not only that, but until rescue teams came, because the whole area was devastated by the earthquake. So it wasn't like nearby villages could come and help, because they had their own devastation. And until people could come from further away, by donkey, by horseback, it would take days, if not weeks, for people to come from Yerushalayim, from other areas, to assist with the rescue efforts. So it was really, really terrible. I mean, even people who survived the initial earthquake but were trapped underneath, no one was able to reach them or rescue them for quite some time. And therefore, many of them died under the rubble, even in the days following the earthquake. When everything was done, so if we look at just the numbers, it really is devastating. First of all, the actual city was completely destroyed. There was basically not a single building left standing. Even if you go on tours of Tzfas today and we point out shuls, that we say this shul was the one that survived. I think there were 3 shuls, as far as I remember, that survived. It's not really that those 3 shuls survived. It's that those 3 shuls were the only ones that weren't completely destroyed. That there was an area of the shul that remained standing miraculously or whatnot. So it wasn't that anything survived. Nothing survived. The entire city of Tzfas was destroyed and had to be rebuilt from scratch. the numbers dead. There's nearly 2,000 Jews who were killed in Tzfas during this earthquake. An amazing devastation. That's 90% of the Tzfas Jewish community is wiped out. There was only about 250 Jews in the Tzfas Jewish community who stayed on to rebuild. Now, some of them it might be a little less than 2,000 people killed, because there were some people who did survive but chose to leave immediately afterwards. So we these are estimates. There's probably 1,800 or so people killed, or closer to 2,000, something like that. And it accounted for about 90% of the Tzfas Jewish community. By the way, if we just want to look at how it affected people in the area, so Tveria, which is further south, there were 600 Jews killed in Tveria. So that means even though Tveria, which was relatively not hit, although Tveria had I guess we could call it a mini tsunami, a small, because of the earthquake, the Kinneret had these huge waves that destroyed the lower sections of the city of Tveria, which lies on the shores of the Kinneret, and that also accounted for some of the damage in Tveria. Altogether, if we take from Lebanon, meaning Jewish communities up in Lebanon, and villages in the area, Pekin and other in the Galilee, there's about between 5,000 and 7,000 killed. Now that's not only Jews, obviously, a lot of Arabs lived in that area. So we're taking total numbers of people, human beings, killed between 5,000 and 7,000 in the whole area from the earthquake. Many of them Jews, especially in Tzfas. So this was a very, very devastating event. So some of the things that happened during the earthquake, in fact, a couple of years ago, I had an episode on the Bas Ayin, of Avram Doiv of Avrich, one of the great Hasidic giants of Ukraine, who later moved to Tzfas and lived out he was the Rav of the Old Yishuv, the Hasidic Old Yishuv in Tzfas in his later years, and he was the rabbi of the Hasidic community of Tzfas during the earthquake. He survived the earthquake, and there was a miraculous event that took place with him in his shul during the earthquake, and that's how he and part of his community, his minyan at least, survived. I spoke about it on that episode. You may want to check out that episode on the Bas Ayin for that and other interesting stories about him and his life and his influence, his leadership. But the Bas Ayin, or Avram Doiv of Avrich, he was when right before the earthquake hit, he gathered the people around him. He told them, come. It was like during Mincha or something. Like I said, it was right as towards evening, as darkness was falling. So they were there for Mincha, and he told everyone to gather around him to this particular corner of the shul, and everyone came close to him. They stood in his proximity, and the shul collapsed as a result of the earthquake, but his area, the place where he was standing and where he asked everyone to stand with him, did not collapse, and they were all saved. So anyone who was standing next to him was saved. Now that's a documented fact. The people who survived told the story. In fact, if you go to the Bas Ayin's shul, which was rebuilt obviously afterwards, today it's a Sephardic shul, which is another interesting story about how Sephardic communities took over a lot of the old Ashkenazi shuls in the Tzfas Old Jewish Quarter. Maybe we'll talk about that another time when we talk about the history of Tzfas. But if you go there today, there's a plaque that stands there that tells about the miracle that the Bas Ayin had in this shul of where they were saved. Now, another story of being saved in this earthquake was his close Talmud, who was the rabbi of Tzfas, or at least the Hasidic rabbi of Tzfas, Rav Shmuel Heller of the Talmud of the Bas Ayin, a student of the Bas Ayin. He lost his entire family in the earthquake. Unfortunately, he almost died as well. He said he was buried up to his neck in debris and he couldn't get himself out, but he was able to survive miraculously. And Rav Shmuel Heller is the reason that Tzfas was rebuilt as a Jewish community. Rav Shmuel Heller was this dynamic, charismatic Rav who led a really, really brave and courageous leadership out of this destruction, that the reason Tzfas once again became a Jewish community. I mean, essentially, if you think about it, the entire infrastructure, all the buildings, homes, institutions, wealth, shuls, schools, everything is destroyed. 90% of the Jewish community is killed, wiped out. Only about 250 people remain. You would think that would be it. We would talk about Tzfas as in the past tense. There would never be a city again. one of the main reasons there still is a city of Tzfas and it was rebuilt was because of Reb Shmuel Heller. It was his leadership. He encouraged people to stay. He helped the rebuilding. He fundraised to rebuild people's homes and help them get jobs again and rebuild shuls and to rescue. It was amazing. For the next 40 years, his long tenure as rabbi, and he, because of him, literally, is why Tzfas was rebuilt. Another story from that time is the story of the Perushim community. Rabbi Yisrael of Shklov, who was one of the students of the Vilna Gaon, who led the Aliyah of the Talmidei Hagra to Tzfas in the first place. He wrote the Pa'as HaShulchan, the compendium of halachas of Jewish law related to the land of Israel. And he was a very, very important leader of the Perushim community for many, many years. He was out of town at the time. He was in Yerushalayim. He immediately started fundraising and led rescue efforts. He headed back towards Tzfas to help out. But as a result of it, the Perushim community in Tzfas actually came to a complete end. All of the Perushim, all of the Talmidei Hagra left Tzfas. Some of them settled in Tveria. Rabbi Yisrael of Shklov himself is buried in Tveria, where he passed away a few years later. But most of them moved to Yerushalayim. So the Perushim community came to an end in Tzfas as a result of the earthquake. And there's all these rehabilitative efforts in the years, in the aftermath of the earthquake. In fact, in 1839, just 2 years after, Sir Moses and Lady Judith Montefiore, the great Jewish philanthropists of the 19th century, and the ones who visited Eretz Yisrael many, many times. Moses Montefiore, who outlived his wife, he visited 7 times. I think 5 of them were together with his wife before she passed away. So they visited in 1839, and he visits Tzfas. In fact, either his wife's diary or his secretary's diary, I don't remember which, just has vivid descriptions of the destruction they still saw all around them 2 years later. The collapsed homes and the empty streets, and it's almost like a death-like silence. It was still a dead community. There was almost no one there. Everything was still destroyed. It was described there, but Montefiore led a lot of the efforts because he funded those efforts to rebuild, and Montefiore also gets a lot of credit for the rebuilding efforts of Tzfas afterwards. Like I said, this was during the time that it was Egyptian control, Ibrahim Pasha, and not the Ottoman Empire, who only takes over control of the area in 1840. So, another topic that I want to talk about, which has to do with the earthquake, is the messianic tension that existed within the Old Yishuv during this time. And the messianic background is that, according to a whole Kabbalistic formula that I don't know and I'm not familiar with because I'm not proficient in the study of Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah or Zohar. But the history books tell us that the Jewish mystics of the 19th century, they believed that the year Tuf Reish, which people incorrectly refer to as 1840, it should really be called 1839-1840 because Tuf Reish starts in September 1839 and ends in September 1840. So 3 months of it are 1839, and then 9 months of it are 1840. So some people, they're very busy with 1840. It's really the year Tuf Reish. It's the Hebrew year. Obviously, that's the Zohar doesn't refer to it as the English year. And the Hebrew year Tuf Reish is both 1839 and 1840. So either you should refer to it as Tuf Reish or say 1839, 1840. Just a piece of advice. In any event, it was assumed that the Tuf Reish, or 1839, 1840, that's a time of messianic arrival, and there's this messianic tension in the years leading up to it, that we have to be prepared for it, and maybe we should move to Eretz Yisrael to be ready for it, to greet the Mashiach. And therefore the years leading up to 1840, or Tuf Reish, are years of Ikvisa de Mashiach, the footsteps of the Mashiach. Or, as Hirsch Leren, the head of the Amsterdam-based Old Yishuv fundraising headquarters. Yerushalayim was this fascinating character who perhaps we'll get to soon. So he was the head of the Vad HaPekidim VeAmarkelim of Amsterdam. It basically means, without getting too complicated, that he was in charge of fundraising for the Old Yishuv and being their administrative office. We can call him in certain ways the dictator of the Old Yishuv. He controlled it, and he was a very, very decisive figure, very important figure, in many ways a controversial figure of the Old Yishuv. He was a banker, a Dutch Jewish banker, but he controlled the Old Yishuv with an iron fist from his base in Amsterdam, and he did it obviously through money, through funding. He was the one who's funding. And he referred to the years leading up to Taf Reish, 1839-1840, he called it Aschalte de Geula. It's the beginning of the Geula. And that's how Rabbi Yisrael of Shklov, the head of the Prussian community, saw it too. They sometimes referred to it as Ikvasa de Mashiach, the footsteps of Mashiach, which is basically the same thing. It's just today, if you don't want to call something Aschalte de Geula, you call it Ikvasa de Mashiach. It's like a different turn of phrase so that no one suspects you of Zionist heretical ideas. So the others called it Chevlei Mashiach. I mean, it's all semantics. It's all the same thing. In any event, but they're getting ready for 1840, the Taf Reish, and and it's leading up to it. Now there happens to be something even more fascinating that the Gemara in Saita, at the end of Saita, describes the Ikvasa de Mashiach. And one of the things it says, V'hagalil techarev, the Galilee is going to be destroyed. And here in 1837, just 3 years before that legendary year of Taf Reish, the entire Galilee was destroyed, including the most important and largest Jewish community in the Galilee, Tzfas, and partially Tveria too. So this is it. This is a clear sign from heaven. The Galilee will be destroyed. Tzfas is destroyed. It's a natural disaster. Natural disasters are very heavenly, very, it's a very, the impetus, and this is definitely harking the arrival of the Messiah. So there's this messianic tension and messianic expectation. There's something else going on in the background, which I want to mention because this is part of the story as well. And that is that there's this competition, which really goes back centuries, between Tzfas and Yerushalayim, as which one is the primary Jewish community. This goes back at least to the 16th century, probably even earlier. But there's this competition. Which is a more important Jewish community, Tzfas or Yerushalayim? Which one is larger? Which one has bigger rabbis? Which one has more power? And it's this both on the ideological plane and the practical one. Was the impact of the earthquake has a big impact on the balance between the two, because since Tzfas was destroyed, so obviously Yerushalayim became stronger. But some understood it in a metaphysical sense. They said, this is a punishment for preferring Tzfas over Yerushalayim. Even though Ashkenazim were essentially banned from residence in Yerushalayim until recently before the earthquake, we just want to note that. But at least for those few years, or Sephardic Jews maybe perhaps, but Ashkenazim didn't really have the opportunity to live in Yerushalayim. They were banned from living in Yerushalayim. But a few years before that, they were allowed to resettle Yerushalayim, which is a different story. We'll hopefully get to that one day as well, or you could hear about it on my tours of the Old City. But when you come here, but there was this some sort as a heavenly sign, a heavenly punishment. We prefer Tzfas over Yerushalayim, and this is a punishment, so Tzfas is destroyed in this earthquake. And Yerushalayim, which is Yerushalayim to be rebuilt, Yerushalayim of the Mashiach, of the Geula, of the redemption, and therefore we have to return to Yerushalayim. That's one of the reasons that all the Prushim leave Tzfas after, the ones who survived, obviously, for Yerushalayim and other places. Some members of the Hasidic community and some members of the Sephardic community as well. They leave Tzfas for Yerushalayim. That's it. Tzfas is over. Obviously, Yerushalayim is more important after we see this heavenly sign from the earthquake. So the 1837 earthquake, between the Tzfas Yerushalayim debate as well as this messianic tension, is seen as a major event. Now, Tzvi Yerushalayim, this fellow that I mentioned before from the Vad HaPekidim VeAmarkelim in Amsterdam. So he's this Dutch Jewish banker. He has this outsized role on the Old Yishuv. All the fundraising goes through him. All the rules go through him. All the chalukah goes through him. And he was very, very strict about how he ran things. And it's really its own topic. He as a person, his family also, his brother, his son, they ran the Old Yishuv for decades with an iron fist. And he felt that the Old Yishuv has to be completely devoted to spiritual pursuits. He said he, living in Amsterdam, could be a wealthy banker. That's fine. But if you're choosing to separate from European Jewish life and settle in the holy cities of Tzfas and Yerushalayim, of the Old Yishuv in the land of Israel, then the Jewish diaspora will support you. And you are not allowed to do anything. You're not allowed to, no bittul Torah, no, you have to be only in prayers and study of Torah and nothing else. No working whatsoever. He blocked any attempt to leave the Chalukah. He blocked attempts at significant immigration. He didn't like it if people moved to the land of Israel because he only wanted holy people who are going to study Torah to move there. He also felt that if too many people would move to the land of Israel, then that would stretch the limits, the economic limits of the Chalukah system. There wouldn't be enough money to distribute, to allocate. The resources would be spread too thin. So he wanted to control immigration. He wanted to control what the people there did. He even was against opening a Jewish hospital because he said a Jewish hospital is not Torah, is not the study of Torah. Oh, people are dying of typhus and malaria and starvation and disease. It doesn't matter. Go to missionary hospitals, go to Arab hospitals. Jews do not have hospitals. That's working. That's not Torah. That's not prayer. He was opposed to that too. He was very, very strict with what he had in mind. And all of this was because of his messianic vision. He believed that the year 1840, the Mashiach was going to come, the redemption was going to come, and it's only going to come if there's a holy Jewish community in the land of Israel studying Torah and only engaging in spiritual pursuits. So he was very excited about the year Tafresh, the upcoming year of 1839, 1840, because that's when Mashiach is going to come, and he was preparing for it, and he saw this earthquake as, with all its devastation and destruction, he saw that as another step in the way. So Laron viewed the result of the earthquake in one way. However, the earthquake's devastation and the fact that they needed so much funding and so much rebuilding, it enabled the rise of Moses Montefiore. And the rise of Moses Montefiore, with his funding of the Old Yishuv, was ultimately the downfall of Hirsch Laron, because this was an outside financial resource that had his own ideas. And Montefiore had ideas about Jewish productivity, about establishing factories and working and employment for Jews of the Old Yishuv. Montefiore's prominence in the Jewish world rose just in the aftermath of the 1837 Tzfas Earthquake, because a couple of years later, 1840, that year, 1840 was the Damascus blood libel, which I discussed a few years ago in an episode. You could check out that episode as well, about the Damascus blood libel and Montefiore's role in helping the Jewish community of Damascus and saving them, essentially. He was successful in getting these libelous, ridiculous, cruel charges dismissed. And Montefiore's prominence in the Jewish world rose, especially in the Middle East. So he was able to have his own input on the Old Yishuv from this time. And for the next ensuing decades, Montefiore built, he funded, he supported, and he had his own ideas about the Old Yishuv. So the rise of Montefiore and the beginning of the downfall of Laron happens because of the earthquake. And it's related to the messianic tension. Now, these expectations, which only rose after the earthquake, because the Jewish people, anytime there's a tragedy, everyone says, there's such a terrible tragedy, it must be that Mashiach is coming. And that's it. And there's expectations rise. And what happens when those expectations aren't met? Then that's not good. That's why it's not good. That's why it's good to have tempered expectations. Messianic tension is not always the healthiest thing for general society. So a couple of years later, 1839, 1840 arrive, Tafresh, and lo and behold, the messianic expectations failed. And that had a very, very, very damaging impact on the Old Yishuv. People gave up. People gave up on the Old Yishuv system. Some of them gave up on Mashiach. Some of them gave up on Judaism altogether. And it was a very difficult time because this devastation of the earthquake was only supposed to lead towards the great redemption, and it did not. So that was a really, really disappointing. And this whole messianic tension surrounding the year Tafresh 1839-1840 was problematic for the long-term impact that it had on the Old Yishuv. So the rebuilding of Tzfas does continue, but there were subsequent pogroms and destructions. In 1838, just 1 year after the devastation of the earthquake, there's another Druze massacre, which some of the survivors of the earthquake were then killed by this Druze massacre. Then there's the return of the Ottoman Empire to the region in 1840. 2 years later, Ibrahim Pasha of Egypt is defeated, and the whole land of Israel returns to the Ottoman Empire. In that same year, 1840, is the passing of the Basayin of Avram Doiv Avrich. So the legendary Hasidic leader of the community passes away. And of course, we said Reb Shmuel Heller is left to rebuild the city. And he succeeded. The demographic growth is incredible because it starts from about 250 Jews in the aftermath of the earthquake. By the end of the 19th century, the Jewish community of Tzfas had rose to 7,000, which is an incredible increase. Way larger than it had been in 1837. 1837, it had been a little bit over 2,000 Jews living in Tzfas. By the end of the night, and it had dropped to 250. These are approximate numbers, obviously, and it rose to approximately 7,000 by the end of the 19th century, rebuilding the city, rebuilding shuls that had been partially destroyed, such as the Basayin's shul or the Maria Buhav's shul, which miraculously, the side of the Aron Kodesh, that entire wall, that entire section of the shul remained intact, but the rest of the shul was destroyed. And then, of course, all the shuls that had been completely destroyed, they had to rebuild from scratch, institutions, schools, homes, and it's largely due to Shmuel Heller's 4 decades of leadership. Now, it's interesting is that the Chof Daled Teves, like I said, at the yard site of the Alter Rebbe of Chabad, so we have big Farbrengens on Chof Daled Teves, the 24th day of Teves, but in Tzfas, for many decades, it was commemorated as a day of mourning and memorial. It was like a date in the Tzfas Jewish community till the 20th century, till the mid-20th century, for about a century afterwards. Today, I don't think it is. I don't know if it is anymore. But for many years, it was this, people were descendants, family members who had been killed. So it was very, very personal for the people who lived in Tzfas. And therefore, it was commemorated almost as like this, communal day of mourning and memorial for many decades afterwards. So this was a little bit of not only the story of the earthquake itself, but the impact that it had on the Jewish community and related issues. This is Yehudi Gerber with Jewish History Soundbites. You can reach me at yehuda@yehudigerber.com for questions, comments, sources, tours, trips, including tours of Israel, history tours in Israel and Yerushalayim, also up north in Tzfas, when hopefully safer times come very quickly. And you can subscribe to Jewish History Soundbites on your favorite podcast platform, and I hope you enjoyed.